The emergency flares lit up the California night like fallen stars, casting eerie shadows across the rugged terrain of Camp Pendleton. In the distance, the sound of helicopters grew louder, their rotors cutting through the November air with urgent precision. But this wasn't a routine training exercise anymore. 3 Marines lay wounded in a ravine 2.5 miles from the nearest medical station, their bodies broken from what was supposed to be a simulated IED explosion that had gone terrifyingly real. The rescue teams were still 20 minutes out, and every second counted. What happened next would be talked about in Marine Corps circles for years to come. A single recruit, barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing just over 100 pounds, would do something that seasoned Marines twice her size said was impossible. She would carry each of those wounded soldiers to safety, one by one, across some of the most challenging terrain the Corps had to offer. But this isn't just a story about physical strength. It's about the kind of quiet determination that can move mountains, and how the most powerful people are often the ones nobody sees coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sofia Martinez had dreamed of becoming a Marine since she was 12 years old. When her father returned from his final deployment with stories that made her small Ohio hometown feel impossibly far from anything that mattered, at 18, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches in her combat boots, with dark hair that she kept regulation short and brown eyes that held more determination than anyone bothered to notice. When she stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Camp Pendleton on a scorching September morning, the first thing Gunnery Sergeant Rick Thompson noticed wasn't her resolve or her perfect test scores. It was how she looked like she'd gotten lost on her way to a high school cheerleading tryout. Echo Company was legendary at Camp Pendleton, known for producing some of the Corps' most elite Marines and for having the most demanding training standards on the West Coast. Their barracks occupied the north end of the depot, where the California sun beat down mercilessly on concrete buildings that had been weathering recruits for decades. The training ground stretched out beyond the main complex like a vast proving ground, with obstacle courses that seemed designed by people who believed comfort was the enemy of greatness. This was where Marines were forged, not born, and everyone who walked through those gates understood that only the strongest would earn the title. The mess hall buzzed with the controlled chaos of 200 recruits finishing their evening meal, the clatter of metal trays mixing with hushed conversations about the day's training. Sofia sat at the end of a long table, methodically eating her dinner while around her, fellow recruits from 3rd Platoon discussed the upcoming Crucible exercise with a mixture of excitement and dread. The Crucible was the final test, 54 hours of the most challenging training the Marine Corps could devise, and it was just 3 days away. Jake Morrison dominated the conversation from his seat at the center of the table, his massive frame making the standard issue uniform look almost too small. At 6'4" and 230 pounds of solid muscle, he'd been the unofficial leader of their platoon since week 2. When he'd carried a fellow recruit and his full pack during a training exercise that had left others struggling just to carry their own gear. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never had to question his physical capabilities. "I'm telling you, the Crucible separates the real Marines from the wannabes," Jake said, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. 54 hours of pure hell. Sleep deprivation, limited food, constant movement. You find out real quick who belongs here and who should have stayed home. Ashley Roberts nodded from across the table, her blonde hair pulled back in the same regulation bun every female recruit wore. She'd proven herself formidable during combat training, earning respect through a combination of speed and tactical thinking that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. "My brother went through it 2 years ago," said. "The worst part isn't the physical stuff, it's when you hit that wall and have to decide if you're really committed to this." Tyler Brooks, A lean recruit from Texas with arms covered in faded tattoos leaned forward with interest. "What's the failure rate for our cycle? Anyone know?" "About 15% usually wash out during the crucible," Ashley replied. "But Thompson's been saying this cycle's different. Tougher standards, less margin for error." Jake's gaze drifted down the table and landed on Sophia, who continued eating in silence. A slow grin spread across his face, the kind that suggested trouble was coming. "Speaking of washing out, what do you think, Martinez? You ready for the real test?" The conversation around them gradually quieted as other recruits sensed the shift in tone. Sophia looked up from her tray, meeting Jake's eyes with steady composure. "I'm ready, really?" Jake's grin widened. "Because I've been watching you struggle with some of the lighter pack exercises. The crucible requires carrying a wounded Marine to safety. That's a 200-pound dead weight across rough terrain. No offense, but you look like you'd have trouble carrying a heavy backpack, let alone a full-grown Marine." Laughter rippled through their section of the mess hall, not cruel but not entirely kind either. It was the sort of laughter that comes when people see an obvious mismatch and can't help pointing it out. Sophia's expression didn't change, but her grip on her fork tightened almost imperceptibly. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Come on, Morrison. She's made it this far." "I'm not trying to be mean," Jake said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm being realistic. This isn't about heart or determination. It's about physics. When your buddy's life depends on you getting him out of a combat zone, good intentions don't cut it." Ashley joined in, though her tone was less mocking than matter of fact. "He's got a point, Sophia. The Corps doesn't lower standards for anyone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If you can't perform the essential tasks, maybe it's better to figure that out now rather than in the field where it actually matters. More nods around the table. Even recruits who'd grown to respect Sophia's quiet competence found themselves wondering if there was truth in what Jake was saying. The physical requirements weren't suggestions. They were life and death necessities. Marcus Williams, a soft-spoken recruit from Georgia who rarely involved himself in these discussions, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should focus on our own preparation instead of worrying about everyone else's." Jake turned his attention to Marcus with the same predatory grin. "That's easy to say when you're not the one who might need carrying. Would you want Martinez trying to haul you to safety? Be honest." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus glanced at Sophia, then back at Jake, clearly uncomfortable with being put on the spot. His silence was answer enough. Sophia finished her last bite, placed her fork down with deliberate precision, and stood up from the table. She picked up her tray and looked directly at Jake for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I guess we'll find out in 3 days." She walked away without another word, leaving behind a table full of recruits who weren't quite sure what to make of her response. Some interpreted it as quiet confidence, others as naive stubbornness. What none of them could have imagined was that Sophia had been preparing for exactly this kind of challenge her entire life. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio, population 847, Sophia had learned early that being underestimated could be an advantage if you knew how to use it. Her father, Staff Sergeant David Martinez, had returned from 3 deployments in Afghanistan with an understanding of what real strength looked like, and it wasn't always measured in pounds lifted or miles run. He'd spent Sophia's teenage years teaching her lessons that most drill instructors never thought to cover, lessons about leverage and momentum, about using an opponent's size against them, about finding strength in places most people never thought to look. Every morning before school, Sophia had trained in their garage with equipment her father had improvised from farm supplies and surplus gear. She learned to move heavy objects using technique rather than brute force, to carry weights that seemed Impossible for her frame, by distributing load properly and maintaining perfect form. More importantly, she learned to endure discomfort without complaint and to find calm in the middle of chaos. But none of that mattered to her fellow recruits, who saw only what everyone always saw first: a small woman in a world built for large men. Back in Barracks 447, the evening routine proceeded with military precision. Gear was cleaned and arranged, uniforms prepared for the next day, personal letters written home. Sophia sat on her narrow bunk, methodically checking her equipment for the third time that evening. Her movements were systematic and thorough, each piece of gear inspected and properly placed. From the bunk across the narrow aisle, Ashley watched with curiosity. Despite her earlier comments in the mess hall, she developed a grudging respect for Sophia's consistency and attention to detail. Sophia never complained, never made excuses, and never seemed to let criticism affect her performance. There was something almost unsettling about her composure. "Martinez," Ashley said quietly, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia looked up from adjusting her pack straps. "Sure. Why are you really here? I mean, you had to know this would be difficult for someone your size." "There are other ways to serve." It was a fair question, asked without malice. Sophia considered her answer carefully before responding. "My dad served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He told me that the Marines he respected most weren't necessarily the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who showed up every day and did what needed to be done, regardless of circumstances." "But there's showing up, and there's being capable of doing the job," Ashley pressed gently. "What happens if you really can't carry someone to safety? That's not just about you anymore." Sophia finished with her pack and turned to face Ashley directly. "Then I'll find another way to get them to safety. But I won't fail." The certainty in her voice was absolute, spoken not as bravado, but as simple fact. Ashley found herself believing it, though she couldn't explain why. 2 bunks down, Jake was holding court with a small group of recruits, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry throughout the barracks. "I'm not saying she's not tough mentally, but the Crucible isn't a mental exercise. It's 54 hours of physical hell designed to push Marines to their absolute limits. You can't think your way through carrying a wounded man 2 miles across rough terrain." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. These weren't cruel people. They were pragmatic ones, focused on the realities of what lay ahead. In 3 days, they would face the most challenging test of their lives, and everyone's performance would affect everyone else's chances of success. Tyler, who'd been listening from his bunk while cleaning his rifle, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should give her the benefit of the doubt. She's made it 11 weeks. That's further than some people twice her size. Making it through basic training and surviving the Crucible are completely different things," Jake replied. "Basic training has safety nets. The Crucible is designed to simulate real combat conditions. When someone gets hurt out there, and someone always does, you need to be able to act. Good intentions don't save lives." The barracks fell quiet after that, each recruit lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The Crucible had a reputation that went beyond its official description as a final test. It was where recruits discovered who they really were when everything else was stripped away. Sleep deprivation, hunger, physical exhaustion, and constant stress combined to create conditions that revealed character in ways that months of training couldn't predict. Sophia lay in her bunk listening to the muted conversations around her, her mind focused not on tomorrow's training, but on the lessons her father had taught her years ago. He'd never told her the course would be easy for someone her size, but he'd taught her that easy wasn't the point. The point was proving that strength came in forms most people never recognized, until it was too late to doubt it. Outside the barracks windows, the California night was clear and cold, with stars visible despite the glow from the base's security lights. In 3 days, those same stars would look down on Iron Valley, where 54 hours of testing would determine who earned the title of Marine, and who went home with nothing but the knowledge that they'd tried their best. Sophia had no intention of going home. The morning sun cast long shadows across Iron Valley as Echo Company assembled for what Gunnery Sergeant Thompson called reality preparation. The training field stretched out before them like a moonscape, dotted with obstacles designed to simulate the harsh conditions Marines might face in combat zones around the world. Rocky terrain, simulated debris fields, and steep inclines created a challenging environment where mistakes had consequences and weakness became immediately apparent. Sophia stood in formation with the rest of 3rd Platoon, her small frame almost lost among the rows of larger recruits. The California air was crisp with the promise of winter, and steam rose from the recruits' breath as they waited for instructions. Thompson paced in front of them with the predatory grace of a man who'd spent 22 years perfecting the art of breaking down civilians and rebuilding them as Marines. "Today we're going to find out who belongs here and who's been wasting my time for 11 weeks, Thompson announced, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "The crucible is 2 days away, and some of you still think this is summer camp with uniforms. You're about to learn differently." His eyes swept the formation, pausing momentarily on Sophia before moving on. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed that particular look, the expression of someone calculating odds and finding them unfavorable. Thompson had made his opinion clear during previous training exercises, though never with the direct confrontation that some instructors favored. His disapproval was quieter but somehow more cutting. "Staff Sergeant Chun will explain today's exercise," Thompson continued, stepping aside for his second in command. Chun moved forward with a clipboard in hand, his expression serious but not unkind. Where Thompson seemed to take personal offense at any sign of weakness, Chun approached training with the methodical precision of someone who understood that breaking recruits served no purpose if they couldn't be rebuilt stronger. "Today's scenario is simple," Chun began. "You'll work in teams of 4 to navigate a casualty evacuation course. One team member will simulate a wounded Marine, complete with deadweight gear to represent combat equipment. The other 3 must transport that casualty through 2 miles of varied terrain to reach the extraction point." Murmurs rippled through the formation as recruits began calculating the challenge ahead. 2 miles didn't sound overwhelming until you considered the terrain of Iron Valley, with its steep ravines, loose gravel slopes, and scattered obstacles designed to complicate every step. "The catch," Chun continued, raising his voice slightly to quiet the whispers, "is that teams will rotate who carries the casualty every 400 meters. Everyone gets a turn. Everyone proves they can do the job when it matters." Sophia felt the weight of eyes turning toward her, though she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. She could sense Jake Morrison's smirk without having to see it, could feel the collective doubt settling over her fellow recruits like fog. The mathematics were simple and unforgiving. A 115-pound woman carrying a 200-pound man across rough terrain while exhausted from previous exertion. Thompson stepped forward again, his voice taking on the edge that indicated he was about to make someone's day significantly worse. "Martinez, front and center." Sophia broke from formation and moved to stand at attention in front of the assembled platoon. Every eye was on her now, and she could feel the mixture of curiosity, pity, and skepticism radiating from her fellow recruits. Thompson circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. "Recruits, take a good look," Thompson said, his voice carrying across the field. "This is what happens when social experiments meet physical reality. The Marine Corps doesn't lower standards to make people feel included. When your buddy's bleeding out in a combat zone, his life depends on your ability to get him to safety. Feelings don't stop bullets, and good intentions don't carry wounded Marines." The silence that followed was thick with discomfort. Some recruits shifted their weight, clearly uneasy with the public humiliation they were witnessing. Others nodded slightly, agreeing with Thompson's harsh assessment. Sophia remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. "Sir, request permission to participate in today's exercise." "Sir," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the attention focused on her. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly, as if surprised by her response. "Martinez, I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself and potentially injuring a fellow Marine. This isn't about courage, it's about capability. Sir, respectfully request the opportunity to demonstrate capability, sir." The exchange was drawing attention from other platoons training nearby. Staff Sergeant Chun watched with interest, his expression unreadable. Thompson seemed torn between annoyance at Sophia's persistence and curiosity about how far she would push the issue. "Fine," Thompson said finally. "But when you fail, and you will fail, I want everyone here to remember that the Corps doesn't make exceptions. We can't afford to." He turned to address the entire formation again. "Team assignments are posted on the board. Study your route, check your gear, and remember that in real combat, failure means your fellow Marines don't come home. Move out." The formation dissolved into organized chaos as recruits hurried to check team assignments and gather equipment. Sophia found her name listed with Tyler Brooks, Marcus Williams, and a recruit named David Chun, Staff Sergeant Chun's younger brother, who'd earned respect through quiet competence and an almost supernatural ability to navigate with map and compass. Tyler approached her as she studied the route map posted near the equipment shed. His expression was sympathetic but concerned, the look of someone who wanted to offer encouragement but couldn't ignore obvious problems. "Sophia, listen," he said, quietly, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. "I think what Thompson did back there was out of line, but the exercise itself is legitimate. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Sophia looked up from the map, her brown eyes steady and calm. "Why wouldn't I? Because—" Tyler struggled to find words that wouldn't sound condescending. "Look, there's no shame in recognizing limitations. The casualty simulation weighs 220 pounds. That's almost twice your body weight." Marcus Williams joined them, having overheard the conversation. His usual quiet demeanor was replaced by obvious worry. "Maybe we could ask Chun to modify the exercise somehow. Use a lighter simulation or shorter distance." "No," Sophia said firmly. "If I can't do this, then I don't belong here, but I can do this." The certainty in her voice was absolute, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already solved a problem others were still worrying about. Tyler and Marcus exchanged glances, both clearly skeptical but unwilling to argue further. "David." Chun approached with their assigned gear, his arms loaded with the equipment they'd need for the exercise. Unlike his brother, David was lean and scholarly looking, more suited for an engineering lab than a battlefield, but he'd proven himself to be one of the most technically proficient recruits in their cycle. "I've been studying the route," David said, spreading a detailed map across a nearby table. "The first 800 meters are relatively flat, but then we hit a series of ravines that'll require some creative problem solving. The final stretch is almost straight uphill to the extraction point." He traced the path with his finger, pointing out specific landmarks and potential obstacles. "If we pace ourselves correctly and use proper lifting techniques, it's definitely doable. The key is maintaining efficiency and not burning out early." Sophia studied the map carefully, her mind already working through the logistics of the challenge. Ahead, years of training with her father had taught her to see solutions others missed, to find ways to accomplish tasks that seemed impossible through conventional approaches. "What's the terrain like in the ravines?" she asked. "Rocky, with loose gravel and some water features," David replied. "The biggest challenge will be maintaining stability while carrying dead weight across uneven surfaces." Tyler shouldered his pack and checked his watch. "We should get moving. Other teams are already starting out." They made their way to the equipment station where Staff Sergeant Chun was overseeing the distribution of casualty simulation gear. The device was essentially a weighted dummy designed to replicate the dead weight of an unconscious Marine, complete with combat gear and the awkward distribution that made carrying a real person so much more difficult than lifting equivalent weight in a gym. Chun looked up as their team approached, his expression neutral but attentive. "Your team will start in 15 minutes. Any questions about the exercise parameters?" "Sir, no sir," the four replied in unison. Chun's gaze lingered on Sophia for a moment, and she thought she detected something that might have been curiosity rather than doubt. "Martinez, you understand that this exercise is designed to simulate real combat conditions? There's no accommodation for size or strength differences." "Sir, yes sir." "And you're confident in your team's ability to complete the course successfully?" Sophia met his eyes directly. "Sir, yes sir." Chun nodded slowly. "Then good luck." As they waited for their start time, Sophia noticed the other teams preparing around them. Jake Morrison's team was engaged in animated discussion about strategy, with Jake clearly positioning himself as the leader and primary carrier. His teammates, all large and physically imposing, seemed confident about their chances of setting a course record. Ashley Roberts led another team with military precision, assigning roles and responsibilities with the efficiency of someone who'd already planned for every contingency. Her teammates responded with the kind of instant obedience that suggested complete faith in her leadership abilities. Other teams showed varying degrees of preparation and confidence, but all shared one common element. They were composed of recruits whose physical capabilities were never questioned. Sophia's team stood out not just for her presence, but for the obvious uncertainty of her teammates about what they were about to attempt. "Okay, here's what I'm thinking," Tyler said, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "We'll start with Marcus carrying, then me, then David, and Sophia can take the final stretch if she's feeling up to it." The suggestion was meant kindly, but Sophia recognized it for what it was, an attempt to minimize her involvement in the most difficult part of the exercise. She considered correcting the assumption, but decided to let her performance speak for itself. "Actually," David interjected, "according to the exercise parameters, we have to rotate every 400 meters regardless of who wants to carry when. It's not optional." Tyler's face fell as he realized the implications. Sophia would have to carry the simulation whether she was ready or not, and there was no way to protect her from the challenge ahead. "Right," Tyler said quietly. "Well, we'll just have to make it work." Staff Sergeant Chun's whistle pierced the morning air, signaling the start of their iteration. Sophia's team moved to the starting line where the casualty simulation waited, like a challenge that couldn't be avoided or minimized. Up close, the device looked even more daunting than it had from a distance, a bulky and awkward mass that would fight every attempt to move it efficiently. Tyler stepped forward first, squatting down to position himself properly before attempting the lift. Even for someone his size, the initial movement was clearly difficult, requiring careful attention to form and leverage to avoid injury. Once he had the simulation properly positioned, he began moving toward the first checkpoint with steady but labored steps. Sophia watched his technique carefully, noting how he distributed the weight and maintained balance on uneven terrain. Her father's training had taught her to learn from observation, to see the subtle details that separated efficient movement from wasted effort. Tyler was strong but not particularly technical, relying more on raw power than refined technique. The first 400 meters passed without major incident, though Tyler was clearly feeling the strain by the time they reached the rotation point. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his breathing had become noticeably heavier. Marcus took over for the second leg, his quieter demeanor masking a wiry strength that proved more efficient than Tyler's brute force. Approach. He moved with careful precision, testing each step before committing his full weight and maintaining a steady pace that looked sustainable for the long haul. David handled the third rotation with the methodical efficiency Sophia had come to expect from him. His engineering mindset translated well to the physical challenge, as he calculated angles and leverage points like mathematical problems to be solved rather than obstacles to be overcome. As they approached the final rotation point, Sophia could feel the weight of expectation settling over their team like a heavy blanket. Tyler and Marcus exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their doubts, while David maintained his usual analytical detachment but clearly harbored concerns about what came next. The terrain ahead was exactly as David had described, a series of steep ravines, connected by narrow trails that would challenge even experienced hikers without the added burden of carrying dead weight. Loose gravel threatened to turn every step into a potential fall, while scattered rocks created an obstacle course that demanded constant attention and perfect balance. Sophia stepped forward to take her turn, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Tyler moved as if to offer assistance, then stopped himself, understanding that interfering would only make things worse. Marcus watched with barely concealed anxiety, while David maintained his scientific curiosity about how the next few minutes would unfold. The casualty simulation lay at Sophia's feet like a test that would define not just her future in the Marine Corps, but her understanding of her own capabilities. Everything she'd learned from her father, every morning spent training in their garage, every lesson about finding strength in unexpected places, had led to this moment. She squatted down beside the simulation, her hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind. Her breathing remained steady, her expression calm, as she positioned herself for what everyone expected to be an impossible task. The weight was exactly as advertised, 220 pounds of awkward, uncooperative mass that seemed designed to fight every attempt at efficient movement. But as Sophia began to lift, something remarkable happened. Instead of struggling against the weight, she seemed to flow around it, using leverage and technique to accomplish what others achieved through brute strength. Her teammates watched in stunned silence as she not only lifted the simulation successfully, but began moving forward with a smooth, efficient gait that looked almost effortless. Her small frame, which everyone had seen as a disadvantage, suddenly became an asset as she navigated the narrow trail with precise footwork that larger recruits couldn't replicate. Tyler jogged alongside her, ready to offer assistance that clearly wasn't needed. "Sophia, how are you doing this?" She didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on the technical challenge of maintaining perfect form while navigating increasingly difficult terrain. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and controlled despite the obvious effort she was expending. "Different approach," she said simply. What she didn't explain was the years of preparation that had made this moment possible. Her father had taught her that carrying a wounded Marine wasn't about overpowering the weight, but about becoming a stable platform that could move efficiently regardless of burden. Every morning workout in their garage had included exercises designed specifically for this challenge, movements that developed the kind of functional strength that couldn't be measured in a weight room. As they descended into the first ravine, Sophia's technique became even more apparent. Where larger recruits would have relied on upper body strength to muscle their way through obstacles, she used her lower body and core to maintain stability, while letting the terrain work with her rather than against her. Her movements were fluid and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary effort. Marcus shook his head in amazement as they reached the bottom of the ravine. "I don't understand how you're making this look easy." "It's not easy," Sophia replied, pausing to adjust her grip. "It's just different." The climb out of the ravine presented a new challenge, as the loose gravel made every step treacherous and the steep angle threatened to throw off her carefully maintained balance. But Sophia had trained for exactly this scenario, learning to use momentum and timing to carry her through difficult passages without relying solely on strength. Halfway up the slope, she encountered a section where the trail narrowed to barely. shoulder width, with a steep drop on one side and a rock wall on the other. It was the kind of obstacle that forced larger recruits to turn sideways and inch their way through. But Sophia's compact frame allowed her to maintain forward momentum, even while carrying her burden. Tyler and Marcus followed behind, no longer offering assistance, but simply bearing witness to something they were struggling to understand. David brought up the rear, his analytical mind working overtime to process what he was observing. As they emerged from the ravine system and began the final ascent to the extraction point, other teams came into view. Some were ahead of schedule, their larger team members having powered through the early sections with impressive speed. Others were struggling with the technical challenges, their superior strength proving less useful than anticipated on the difficult terrain. Jake Morrison's team was visible on a parallel trail, making good time but clearly feeling the effects of their aggressive early pace. Jake himself was carrying during this rotation, his massive frame moving with determination but obvious strain. When he spotted Sophia's team, his expression shifted from concentration to confusion to something that might have been concern. Ashley Roberts' team was maintaining their characteristic precision, rotating carriers with military efficiency and showing no signs of the fatigue that was beginning to affect other groups. Ashley moved like someone who'd calculated every variable and planned for every contingency, her confidence unshaken by the challenge ahead. But it was Sophia's team that was drawing the most attention from observers positioned along the route. Staff Sergeant Chun had positioned himself at a vantage point where he could monitor multiple teams simultaneously, and his focus kept returning to the small figure moving steadily up the final slope with what appeared to be impossible composure. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson was also watching, though his expression was harder to read. The public challenge he'd issued earlier in the day was turning into something he hadn't anticipated, and the implications were becoming clearer with every step Sophia took toward the extraction point. As Sophia approached the steepest section of the final climb, her teammates began to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the physical accomplishment of carrying heavy weight across difficult terrain, but the revelation that strength could take forms they'd never considered. Sophia wasn't overpowering the challenge. She was solving it with a combination of technique, preparation, and quiet determination that made their previous assumptions seem foolish. The extraction point was still several hundred meters ahead, but for the first time since the exercise began, Tyler and Marcus allowed themselves to believe that their team might not just complete the course, but excel at it. David continued his mental calculations, but his scientific curiosity was giving way to something closer to admiration. Sophia maintained her steady pace, her breathing controlled and her movements efficient, as if carrying over 200 pounds of dead weight. Across some of the most challenging terrain Camp Pendleton had to offer was exactly what she'd been born to do. The extraction point materialized through the morning haze like a beacon of salvation, marked by orange flags and a medical station staffed with corpsmen who looked as though they'd been waiting for hours. Sophia crested the final ridge with the casualty simulation still secured across her shoulders, her breathing steady despite the grueling ascent that had left other teams scattered across the valley below in various states of exhaustion and defeat. Tyler reached the checkpoint first, his disbelief evident as he turned to watch Sophia complete what everyone had assumed would be impossible. Marcus followed close behind, shaking his head in amazement, while David maintained his analytical composure, but couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. What they had witnessed over the past hour defied every assumption they'd made about physical capability and the relationship between size and strength. Sophia lowered the simulation with the same controlled precision she'd maintained throughout the exercise, her movements deliberate and economical. The corpsman on duty checked his stopwatch and made a notation on his clipboard, his expression suggesting that their completion time was better than expected, possibly better than most teams would achieve. "Outstanding work," the corpsman said. Addressing the entire team, but his gaze lingering on Sophia. "You've set the pace for the rest of the exercise. Recovery station is to your left, hydration and medical check to your right." As Sophia's team moved toward the recovery area, other teams continued to struggle up the final approach. Jake Morrison's team was visible several hundred meters below, making steady progress, but clearly feeling the effects of their earlier aggressive pace. Jake himself was no longer carrying, having rotated out during the steepest section of the climb, and his replacement was moving with the labored determination of someone approaching their physical limits. Ashley Roberts' team maintained their characteristic precision, rotating carriers with military efficiency and showing remarkable coordination despite the challenging terrain. Ashley moved like someone who'd calculated every variable and planned for every contingency, her leadership evident in the way her teammates responded to subtle hand signals and verbal cues. But it was the teams scattered across the lower sections of the course that told the real story of the day's challenge. Several groups had stopped to rest, their members clearly struggling with the combination of weight, terrain, and accumulated fatigue. One team had activated their emergency beacon, requesting medical assistance for a recruit who'd collapsed during his carrying rotation. Staff Sergeant Chun appeared at the extraction point as if materialized from the morning air, his expression unreadable as he approached Sophia's team. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the casual conversation around the recovery station died away as Marines sensed the significance of whatever was about to unfold. "Martinez," Chun said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "step forward." Sophia moved to stand at attention in front of Chun, her posture perfect despite the obvious fatigue from the exercise. Her uniform showed the effects of the challenging course, with dirt stains and small tears that spoke to the difficulty of the terrain she'd just conquered, but her bearing remained impeccable. Chun studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in details that others might miss. "Explain your technique." The request was unexpected, delivered not as an order but as a genuine inquiry from one professional to another. Sophia considered her response carefully, understanding that this moment carried implications beyond a simple training exercise. "Sir, the key is understanding that carrying dead weight isn't about overpowering the load, but about becoming an efficient transport system," Sophia began, her voice steady and clear. "Proper leverage, core stability, and efficient movement patterns allow for sustained performance, regardless of the size differential between carrier and load." Chun nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that her answer aligned with his own understanding of the principles involved. "Where did you learn these techniques?" "Sir, my father served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He taught me that Marines adapt to accomplish the mission, regardless of individual limitations." The response carried weight beyond its simple words, invoking the kind of Marine Corps tradition that transcended individual achievement and spoke to larger principles of service and dedication. Chun's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been approval or at least recognition of the values Sophia represented. "Outstanding," Chun said finally. "Report to Gunnery Sergeant Thompson for debrief." As Sophia made her way toward the command post where Thompson waited, she could feel the weight of attention from every Marine in the area. Word of her performance had already begun to spread through the informal networks that connected training units, and the look she received ranged from curiosity to outright amazement. Thompson stood near a tactical table covered with maps and timing sheets, his expression carefully neutral as he watched Sophia approach. The morning's events had clearly not unfolded as he'd anticipated, and the implications were forcing him to reconsider assumptions he'd held with absolute certainty just hours earlier. "Martinez," Thompson said as she came to attention before him, "your team finished first, with the fastest completion time recorded for this exercise in the current training cycle." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything Thompson had said earlier about Sophia's capabilities. Around the command post, other instructors and staff members had stopped their conversations to listen, understanding that this moment represented something larger than a single training exercise. Furthermore, Thompson continued, consulting his notes, your individual carrying time was the most efficient of any recruit participating in today's exercise. You maintained better pace and showed less fatigue than Marines significantly larger than yourself. Sophia remained at attention, her expression unchanged despite the magnitude of what Thompson was acknowledging. She understood that this wasn't about personal vindication, but about the larger principle that capability couldn't be measured by superficial characteristics. Sir, request permission to speak freely, sir, Sophia said. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded his consent. Granted. Sir, I understand the importance of physical standards in the Marine Corps. Every Marine must be capable of performing essential tasks under combat conditions. What I demonstrated today wasn't an exception to those standards, but a different approach to meeting them. The response was carefully crafted, acknowledging Thompson's concerns while reframing the entire discussion. Sophia wasn't asking for special consideration or arguing against high standards. She was demonstrating that those standards could be met through means other than raw physical power. Thompson studied her for a long moment, his expression suggesting an internal struggle between ingrained assumptions and undeniable evidence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone of grudging respect that hadn't been present in their earlier interactions. Martinez, report to my office at 1800 hours for individual counseling session. The dismissal was formal but not hostile, carrying implications that Sophia understood even if others didn't. Individual counseling sessions with senior instructors were reserved for recruits who required special attention, either because they were failing to meet standards or because they showed exceptional promise that merited additional development. As Sophia returned to her team, Tyler and Marcus greeted her with expressions of amazement and newfound respect. David maintained his analytical demeanor, but his questions revealed a scientific curiosity about the techniques she demonstrated and their broader applications. I don't understand how you made that look effortless, Tyler said, shaking his head in bewilderment. I was struggling after 400 meters, and you carried for twice that distance without breaking stride. It wasn't effortless, Sophia replied. It was just different. My father taught me that Marines find ways to accomplish the mission, regardless of individual characteristics or limitations. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Your father sounds like someone worth learning from. He was, Sophia said simply. He taught me that strength comes in many forms, and the most important form is the determination to never give up on your fellow Marines. The afternoon proceeded with additional training exercises, but the dynamic within 3rd Platoon had shifted in ways that would prove permanent. Sophia was no longer the questionable recruit who might not belong, but a proven Marine who demonstrated capabilities that commanded respect. Her teammates sought her advice on technique and efficiency, understanding that she possessed knowledge that could benefit everyone. Jake Morrison's team finished the exercise nearly 30 minutes after Sophia's, with Jake himself requiring medical attention for heat exhaustion during his final carrying rotation. His earlier confidence had been replaced by a grudging acknowledgement that size and strength didn't guarantee success, and that assumptions about capability could prove dangerously wrong. Ashley Roberts approached Sophia during the afternoon break, her usual command presence tempered by genuine curiosity about what she'd witnessed. I need to ask you something, Ashley said, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. What you did today, that level of efficiency and technique, where did it come from? Sophia considered her response carefully, understanding that Ashley's question went beyond mere curiosity to touch on fundamental questions about preparation and capability. Years of training with someone who understood that physical challenges require more than physical solutions. Your father? Yes, he taught me that the Marine Corps doesn't make exceptions, but it rewards innovation. Finding better ways to accomplish essential tasks isn't about lowering standards, it's about raising performance. Ashley nodded slowly, her expression suggesting Sophia's words aligned with her own understanding of military excellence. Would you be willing to share some of those techniques with others? I think a lot of recruits could benefit from that knowledge. The request represented a significant shift in group dynamics, with one of the platoon's most respected leaders acknowledging that Sophia possessed valuable expertise worth sharing. It was exactly the kind of recognition that Sophia had never sought, but had earned through demonstrated competence. Of course, Sophia replied. Marines help Marines. That's what we do. That evening, Sophia reported to Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's office as ordered, uncertain what to expect from the individual counseling session. Thompson's office was spartanly furnished, with regulation furniture and walls decorated with Marine Corps memorabilia that spoke to a career dedicated to service and excellence. Thompson gestured for Sophia to take a seat across from his desk, his manner more formal than hostile. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent considerable time thinking about the day's events and their implications. Martinez, I owe you an apology, Thompson began, his words carrying the gravity of someone who didn't make such admissions lightly. This morning I made assumptions about your capabilities based on superficial characteristics. Those assumptions were wrong, and my behavior was unprofessional. Sophia remained at attention despite being seated, understanding that this moment required formal military bearing. Sir, no apology necessary. Standards must be maintained, and questioning capability is appropriate when lives depend on performance. But that's exactly the point, Thompson continued. I questioned your capability without giving you the opportunity to demonstrate it. I let preconceptions influence my judgment, and that's a failure of leadership on my part. The admission was significant, representing not just personal acknowledgement of error, but recognition of broader principles about fairness and professional evaluation. Thompson's willingness to confront his own biases demonstrated the kind of intellectual honesty that separated good leaders from merely adequate ones. Sir, what matters is that the Corps maintains the highest standards and produces Marines capable of accomplishing any mission, Sophia replied. Individual recognition is less important than collective excellence. Thompson nodded approvingly. That attitude is exactly why you'll make an outstanding Marine. Your performance today wasn't just about individual capability. It was about demonstrating that the Corps benefits when we evaluate people based on performance rather than assumptions. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. I'm recommending you for accelerated leadership development. Your combination of technical competence, mental toughness, and professional bearing suggests potential for advanced responsibility. The recommendation was unexpected, representing a significant opportunity for career advancement and recognition within the Marine Corps hierarchy. But Sophia understood that such opportunities came with increased expectations and responsibilities. Sir, I'm honored by your confidence, but I want to complete my training and prove myself alongside my fellow recruits before accepting any special consideration. Thompson's expression shifted to something that might have been admiration. That response confirms my assessment. You understand that leadership is earned through service to others, not individual achievement. The crucible began 2 days later under conditions that tested every lesson learned during weeks of preparation. 54 hours of continuous training under simulated combat conditions, with limited food, minimal sleep, and constant physical and mental challenges designed to reveal character under extreme stress. Sophia's performance during the casualty evacuation exercise had established her reputation within Echo Company, but the crucible demanded sustained excellence across every aspect of Marine Corps training. Navigation, marksmanship, tactical movement, leadership under pressure, and the ability to function as part of a team when exhaustion and stress threatened to break down individual resolve. The crisis came during the second night, when a training Exercise involving simulated explosive devices went catastrophically wrong. What should have been a controlled demonstration of battlefield medicine became a real emergency when faulty equipment caused actual injuries to 3 recruits, leaving them unconscious and bleeding in a remote section of the training area. The nearest medical team was 20 minutes away, but the injured Marines didn't have 20 minutes. Someone needed to get them to the aid station immediately. Across 2.5 miles of some of the most challenging terrain Camp Pendleton had to offer in complete darkness, while other recruits dealt with their own exhaustion and shock. Sophia didn't hesitate. While others stood frozen by the magnitude of the crisis, she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario. The techniques her father had taught her, the principles she demonstrated during the exercise, the quiet confidence that had sustained her through weeks of doubt and criticism, all converged in this moment when training became reality. One by one, she carried the wounded recruits to safety, her small frame moving through the darkness with sure-footed determination that defied every assumption about physical limitation and capability. Each trip required perfect navigation, flawless technique, and absolute commitment to the principle that Marines never leave fellow Marines behind. By the time the medical helicopters arrived, Sophia had transported all 3 casualties to the aid station, her uniform torn and blood-stained, but her resolve unshaken. The corpsmen who received the wounded Marines later reported that her quick action and efficient transport had likely saved at least 1 life, possibly all 3. Word of Sophia's actions spread through the Marine Corps with the speed that attends genuine heroism. Not the manufactured heroism of propaganda and public relations, but the quiet heroism of someone who did what needed to be done when it mattered most, without regard for recognition or reward. The investigation that followed confirmed that Sophia had acted with extraordinary competence under extreme conditions, demonstrating exactly the kind of character and capability that the Marine Corps sought to develop in every recruit. Her combination of technical skill, mental toughness, and unwavering commitment to fellow Marines represented the ideal that training was designed to achieve. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's final evaluation of Sophia's performance was unqualified in its praise. She had not only met every standard required for graduation, but had exceeded them in ways that established new benchmarks for excellence. Her leadership during the crisis had demonstrated maturity and judgment that surpassed many Marines with years of experience. The graduation ceremony 3 weeks later was held on the same parade ground where Sophia had first been dismissed as too small and weak to succeed as a Marine. She stood in formation with the other members of Echo Company, no longer the questionable recruit who might not belong, but a proven Marine who'd earned her place through demonstrated competence and unwavering commitment to Corps' values. When her name was called to receive special recognition for heroism during training, the applause came not from politeness, but from genuine respect. Her fellow Marines understood that they were witnessing something rare, the recognition of someone who'd proven that strength came in forms that couldn't be measured by conventional standards. Staff Sergeant Chun presented Sophia with the award, his words carrying the weight of someone who'd witnessed her transformation from dismissed recruit to respected Marine. Lance Corporal Martinez represents the best traditions of the Marine Corps. Her courage, competence, and commitment to fellow Marines exemplify the values we strive to instill in every Marine. Sophia accepted the recognition with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout her training, understanding that individual awards were less important than the collective achievement of her entire company. She had proven herself not to gain recognition, but to demonstrate that the Marine Corps benefited when it evaluated people based on performance rather than assumptions. Years later, Sophia's story would be told in Marine Corps training facilities around the world, not as an example of exceptional achievement by someone overcoming disadvantages, but as a demonstration of what became possible when capability was measured by results rather than superficial characteristics. Her techniques for efficient casualty evacuation became standard curriculum, and her approach to leadership under pressure influenced training programs throughout the Corps. But on that graduation day, as Sophia stood with her fellow Marines under the California sun, what mattered most was not the recognition or the legacy she would leave. What mattered was that she had become exactly what her father had always known she could be, a Marine who would never leave a fellow Marine behind, regardless of the personal cost or physical challenge involved. The ceremony concluded with the traditional playing of the Marine Corps hymn, and as the music echoed across the parade ground, Sophia understood that her journey was just beginning. The challenges ahead would be different, but no less demanding, requiring the same combination of technical competence, mental toughness, and unwavering commitment to excellence that had brought her to this moment. She had proven that strength came in many forms, that capability couldn't be judged by appearances, and that the most powerful people were often those who worked quietly and competently without seeking recognition or reward. These lessons would serve her well in the years ahead, as she continued to demonstrate that Marines succeed not because of individual characteristics, but because of shared commitment to values larger than themselves. The doubters had been silenced, not through argument or protest, but through demonstrated performance under the most demanding conditions. Sophia Martinez had become a Marine not despite her size, but because she possessed the character, competence, and commitment that defined the Corps at its best. The equipment room at Camp Pendleton smelled of leather, metal polish, and the accumulated sweat of thousands of Marines who had passed through its doors over the decades. Sophia stood in line with the other recruits from 3rd Platoon, waiting to receive gear for the upcoming Crucible exercise that would determine whether 11 weeks of grueling training had transformed them into Marines worthy of the title. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of tactical equipment, each piece carefully maintained and precisely organized according to military standards that left no room for error or compromise. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the supply specialist responsible for equipment distribution, moved through the room with mechanical efficiency, checking serial numbers and ensuring that each recruit received exactly what regulations required. His weathered hands spoke of years spent maintaining the tools that kept Marines alive in combat zones around the world, and his attention to detail reflected an understanding that faulty equipment could mean the difference between life and death when it mattered most. "Martinez, Sophia," Rodriguez called out, consulting his clipboard with the same precision he brought to every aspect of his duties. Sophia stepped forward to the counter where Rodriguez had arranged her assigned gear in neat rows, each item positioned exactly as regulations specified. Combat boots that looked suspiciously worn compared to the pristine footwear issued to other recruits lay beside a tactical vest that had clearly seen better days. The sleeping bag showed signs of repeated field use, with patches that suggested previous repairs, and the water purification tablets were nearing their expiration date. "This is my gear?" Sophia asked, not challenging the assignment, but seeking clarification about equipment that appeared substandard compared to what her fellow recruits were receiving. Rodriguez glanced up from his paperwork, his expression suggesting that questions about equipment assignments were both unwelcome and pointless. "That's what's available for your size and classification. Equipment is distributed based on availability and projected need." The explanation made no logical sense, as equipment distribution should have been standardized regardless of individual characteristics, but Sophia understood the underlying message. Even here, in the sterile environment of equipment issue, assumptions about her capabilities were influencing how she was treated. The worn gear wasn't an accident or oversight, but a deliberate assignment based on expectations that she wouldn't complete the Crucible successfully enough to justify issuing pristine equipment. Tyler Brooks, standing behind Sophia in line, watched the exchange with growing discomfort. His own equipment had been immaculate, with boots that looked fresh from the factory and gear that showed no signs of previous use. The contrast was obvious and deliberate, designed to send a message about who was expected to succeed and who was merely going through the motions before inevitable failure. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Tyler interjected, his voice carefully respectful but carrying an edge of concern. "I think there might be some mistake with Martinez's equipment. Her boots look like they've been through several training cycles." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he turned his attention to Tyler, clearly annoyed by the suggestion that his equipment distribution contained errors. "Brooks, is it? Let me explain something about military equipment management. Gear is assigned based on multiple factors including projected usage, training objectives, and resource allocation. Every recruit gets functional equipment appropriate to their individual requirements." The explanation was bureaucratic nonsense designed to obscure the obvious discrimination in equipment assignment, but delivered with enough authority to discourage further questions. Tyler opened his mouth as if to respond, then thought better of challenging a staff sergeant over equipment policies he didn't fully understand. Sophia accepted her assigned gear without further comment, understanding that arguing would only draw more negative attention while accomplishing nothing productive. She'd learned early in her Marine Corps training that some battles weren't worth fighting, and that proving herself through performance was more effective than demanding fair treatment through complaints. Marcus Williams received his equipment next with gear quality that fell somewhere between Sophia's obviously used items and Tyler's pristine issue. His boots showed minor scuffing, and his tactical vest had small signs of wear, but nothing approaching the condition of Sophia's equipment. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone paying attention. Equipment quality correlated directly with perceived potential for success. Jake Morrison's gear was flawless, with everything appearing fresh from manufacturer packaging. His boots gleamed with factory finish, his tactical vest showed no signs of previous use, and even his water purification tablets were months from expiration. The message was unmistakable. Some recruits were expected to succeed, while others were merely going through required motions before predictable failure. "Listen up," Rodriguez announced to the assembled recruits as equipment distribution concluded. "The crucible begins at 040 tomorrow morning. You will assemble with full gear and formation outside Barracks 447. Any recruit whose equipment fails during the exercise will be held responsible for mission compromise. There are no equipment replacements available during the 54-hour training period." The warning carried special significance for Sophia, whose worn gear made equipment failure a distinct possibility. Her boots, in particular, showed stress, points that suggested they might not survive the demanding terrain and constant movement that characterized crucible training. But she understood that complaining about equipment quality would only reinforce perceptions that she was looking for excuses to explain anticipated failure. Ashley Roberts approached Sophia as they left the equipment room, her expression showing the kind of professional concern that military leaders developed when they recognized potential problems affecting team performance. Ashley had established herself as one of the most capable recruits in Echo Company, and her opinion carried weight with both instructors and fellow Marines. "Sophia, we need to talk about your equipment situation," Ashley said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard by passing instructors. "Those boots aren't going to last 54 hours of intensive training. The sole separation is already visible, and the lacing system shows significant wear." Sophia nodded, having already conducted her own assessment of the equipment's condition. "I know, but this is what was issued, and regulations require using assigned gear during training exercises." "There might be ways around that," Ashley suggested. "Unofficial equipment exchanges happen all the time. I could talk to some of the other recruits about trading gear to get you something more reliable." The offer was generous and reflected Ashley's understanding that team success depended on every member having functional equipment. But Sophia recognized that accepting help with equipment would only reinforce perceptions that she needed special consideration to meet basic requirements. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to work with what I have," Sophia replied. "If the gear fails, I'll find ways to adapt and continue the mission." Ashley studied Sophia's expression, clearly trying to understand whether her refusal reflected pride, stubbornness, or genuine confidence in her ability to overcome equipment limitations. "This isn't about pride, Sophia. It's about mission success. If your boots fail during a critical moment, it affects the entire team." "You're right," Sophia acknowledged. "But accepting equipment exchanges sends the message that I can't handle standard challenges. I'd rather prove I can succeed with whatever gear I'm given than create the impression that I need special accommodation." The logic was sound from a leadership perspective, but Ashley remained concerned about the practical implications. The Crucible was designed to test recruits under extreme conditions, and equipment failure could turn challenging training into dangerous emergency situations. David Chun joined their conversation, having overheard enough to understand the situation. His analytical mind immediately began calculating the probability of equipment failure and its potential consequences for team performance during the Crucible exercise. "From an engineering perspective, those boots are definitely compromised," David observed, his tone clinical rather than critical. "The adhesive binding the sole is degraded, probably from repeated exposure to moisture and temperature cycling. Under sustained stress, failure is almost inevitable." "How long do you estimate before failure occurs?" Sophia asked, treating David's assessment as useful information rather than discouraging prediction. David examined the boots more carefully, his engineering background allowing him to evaluate structural integrity with greater precision than most recruits could manage. "Depends on terrain and usage intensity. On flat surfaces with minimal stress, they might last the full exercise. But the Crucible includes rough terrain, water crossings, and extended periods of movement. I'd estimate failure within the first 24 hours under those conditions." The prediction was sobering but not unexpected. Sophia had reached similar conclusions during her own equipment assessment, understanding that she would likely face the final 30 hours of Crucible training with compromised footwear or no boots at all. "What's your backup plan?" Ashley asked, her leadership instincts demanding practical solutions to foreseeable problems. Sophia considered her response carefully, understanding that her teammates needed confidence in her ability to handle equipment failure without compromising team performance. "Field expedient repairs if possible, improvised footwear if necessary. Marines adapt and overcome, regardless of circumstances." The response was pure Marine Corps' doctrine, reflecting the institutional expectation that Marines find ways to accomplish missions despite equipment failure, personnel loss, or other complications beyond their control. But doctrine was easier to recite than to implement under extreme stress and physical exhaustion. Tyler had been listening to the conversation with growing frustration about the obvious unfairness of Sophia's equipment assignment. His sense of justice demanded action to address what was clearly discriminatory treatment, even if Sophia herself was unwilling to challenge the system. "This is ridiculous," Tyler said, his voice carrying the indignation of someone who believed military institutions should operate according to stated principles of fairness and merit. Equipment should be distributed equally, not based on whether someone thinks you're going to succeed or fail. "You're right," Sophia agreed. "But the Marine Corps doesn't promise fair treatment. It promises the opportunity to prove yourself under adverse conditions. Sometimes those adverse conditions include dealing with systems that aren't perfect." Her response reflected a mature understanding of institutional dynamics that impressed her teammates while highlighting the philosophical difference between demanding fairness and accepting challenge. Sophia wasn't excusing discrimination, but she was refusing to let it become an excuse for failure. Marcus Williams, who had remained quiet during most of the conversation, finally offered his perspective with the thoughtful consideration that characterized his approach to complex problems. Maybe the equipment issue isn't really about equipment at all. Maybe it's another test to see how you handle obstacles that aren't directly related to training objectives. The observation was perceptive, suggesting that Sophia's equipment assignment might be intentional rather than merely discriminatory. Military training often included hidden tests designed to evaluate character traits that couldn't be measured through conventional exercises. And equipment sabotage was a classic method for assessing adaptability and resilience. If that's true, then accepting equipment exchanges or complaining about unfair treatment would be failing the real test, Sophia said, her understanding of the situation crystallizing around Marcus's insight. The test isn't whether I can complete the crucible with good equipment. It's whether I can complete it regardless of equipment quality. Ashley nodded slowly, her leadership experience allowing her to recognize the logic in Sophia's interpretation. Military leaders were often evaluated based on their ability to accomplish missions despite resource limitations, personnel problems, and equipment failures. Learning to succeed under adverse conditions was fundamental to developing the kind of resilience that combat situations demanded. In that case, we need to prepare for equipment failure as part of our team strategy, Ashley said, her mind already working through contingency plans. If Sophia's boots fail, we need protocols for continuing the mission without compromising team performance. David began calculating logistics immediately, his engineering mindset automatically developing solutions for foreseeable problems. Field-expedient footwear can be improvised from available materials. Duct tape, cardboard, even thick socks can provide temporary protection. The key is having materials ready and knowing how to apply them quickly. Tyler remained uncomfortable with the entire situation, but he recognized that Sophia had made her decision and arguing further would only create team friction without solving the underlying problem. Okay, but if your boots fail and you need help, don't be too proud to ask for it. Team success matters more than individual achievement. Sophia appreciated Tyler's concern and understood that his offer reflected genuine care for team welfare, rather than doubt about her capabilities. I promise to prioritize team success over personal pride, but I also promise to exhaust every option before accepting help that others might interpret as special consideration. The conversation concluded with an understanding that Sophia would face the crucible with compromised equipment, but prepared teammates who would support her if circumstances demanded intervention. It wasn't ideal, but it reflected the kind of adaptive planning that military units use to overcome resource limitations and unexpected obstacles. That evening, Sophia conducted a detailed inspection of her assigned gear, identifying potential failure points and developing contingency plans for each piece of equipment. Her boots received special attention, as David's prediction of early failure seemed increasingly accurate under close examination. The sole separation was more extensive than initially apparent, and the lacing system showed stress points that suggested imminent failure. But Sophia's inspection revealed something else, evidence that the equipment assignment hadn't been random or based on availability. Small markings and serial numbers suggested that her gear had been deliberately selected from items scheduled for replacement or disposal. Someone had intentionally issued her the worst available equipment, either as a test of her resilience or as a deliberate attempt to ensure her failure. The discovery reinforced Sophia's determination to succeed, despite the obstacles placed in her path. She understood that complaining about discriminatory treatment would only validate concerns about her resilience and adaptability. Instead, she focused on preparation that would allow her to complete the crucible regardless of equipment condition. Using techniques her father had taught her during their training sessions in Ohio, Sophia began modifying her boots to maximize their remaining structural integrity. Carefully applied tape reinforced stress points without violating regulations about equipment modification. Strategic padding redistributed pressure to minimize wear on compromised areas. Small adjustments to lacing technique provided additional support without requiring prohibited modifications. Her other equipment received similar attention, with every item inspected and optimized to provide maximum reliability under extreme conditions. Sophia understood that equipment failure was now inevitable rather than merely possible, but proper preparation could delay that failure until the most critical phases of training were completed. Tyler stopped by her bunk as she worked on equipment. Preparation, carrying a small roll of high-quality duct tape that he placed beside her without comment. Marcus appeared a few minutes later with waterproofing compound that could extend the life of compromised boots. David contributed cable ties and other small items that could serve as field-expedient repair materials. The support from her teammates was offered quietly and without fanfare, reflecting their understanding that Sophia had chosen to face the challenge independently, but deserved backup resources if circumstances demanded their use. None of them questioned her decision to refuse equipment exchanges, but all of them wanted to ensure she had options if her gear failed at critical moments. Ashley conducted her own equipment inspection that evening, not because she expected problems with her superior gear, but because team leadership required understanding every potential failure mode that could affect mission success. Her analytical review confirmed David's assessment of Sophia's equipment condition, while identifying additional concerns that careful observation had revealed. "Your tactical vest has a torn strap that could fail under load," Ashley reported to Sophia during their final equipment check. "It's not immediately obvious, but sustained weight could cause complete separation." Sophia examined the area Ashley indicated, finding a small tear in webbing that had been masked by careful positioning during equipment issue. Like the boot problems, this appeared to be intentional rather than accidental, suggesting systematic effort to provide her with gear designed to fail under stress. "How many other problems are we going to discover?" Tyler asked, his frustration with the situation evident in his voice. "All of them, hopefully," Sophia replied calmly. "Better to identify potential failures now than discover them during the exercise." Her pragmatic approach to equipment problems impressed her teammates, while highlighting the difference between focusing on obstacles and focusing on solutions. Sophia had accepted that her gear was compromised and moved directly to managing that reality rather than dwelling on the unfairness of the situation. Jake Morrison approached their group as equipment inspection concluded, his expression suggesting curiosity rather than his usual condescension. Word of Sophia's equipment problems had spread through the platoon, creating discussions about fairness and discrimination that some recruits found uncomfortable. "Martinez, I heard about your equipment situation," Jake said, his tone lacking the mocking edge that usually characterized his interactions with Sophia. "That's pretty messed up, even by Marine Corps standards." The acknowledgement was unexpected, suggesting that even Jake recognized the difference between legitimate training challenges and deliberate sabotage. His comment also indicated that other recruits were beginning to question whether Sophia's treatment reflected institutional bias rather than objective assessment of capability. "It is what it is," Sophia replied simply. "Marines adapt and overcome, regardless of circumstances." Jake studied her expression, clearly trying to understand whether her calm acceptance reflected genuine confidence or elaborate self-deception. "You really think you can complete the Crucible with gear that's designed to fail?" "I think the Crucible is designed to test more than just equipment reliability," Sophia said. "If my gear fails, I'll find ways to continue the mission. That's what Marines do." The response reflected Marine Corps' values about persistence and adaptability, but Jake remained skeptical about the practical implications. The Crucible demanded peak performance under extreme conditions, and equipment failure could transform challenging training into impossible obstacles. What happens if your boots completely fall apart during a night navigation exercise? Jake pressed. Bare feet across rough terrain in the dark isn't adaptation, it's stupidity. Sophia considered the question seriously, understanding that Jake was raising legitimate concerns about safety and mission success, rather than simply trying to discourage her. Then I'll improvise footwear from available materials and continue the mission. Or I'll complete the navigation barefoot, if that's what circumstances require. The certainty in her voice was absolute, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already mentally rehearsed every possible failure scenario and developed contingency plans for each one. Jake found himself believing that Sophia would indeed attempt to complete the crucible regardless of equipment condition, though he remained doubtful about her chances of success. You're either the most determined person I've ever met, or completely insane, Jake said, his tone suggesting that he was beginning to lean toward the former assessment. Maybe both, Sophia replied with a slight smile. But I'm going to earn the title of Marine, regardless of what it takes. The conversation marked a subtle shift in Jake's attitude toward Sophia, moving from dismissive mockery toward grudging respect for her determination. He still doubted her physical capabilities, but he could no longer question her mental toughness or commitment to succeeding despite obvious obstacles. As the platoon prepared for sleep before the crucible's early morning start, Sophia conducted one final equipment check, ensuring that every item was optimized for maximum reliability under stress. Her boots remained the primary concern, but careful inspection had identified ways to extend their functional life through strategic use and field repairs. Her teammates settled into their bunks with equipment arranged for rapid morning assembly. Each recruit focused on the 54 hours of testing that would determine whether 11 weeks of training had prepared them for the challenges ahead. Some approached the crucible with confidence born of superior equipment and physical capability. Others faced it with determination that transcended material advantages. Sophia fell into the latter category, understanding that her path to earning the title of Marine would require overcoming obstacles that others didn't face. But she also understood that those obstacles would prove her worthiness in ways that easier paths could never accomplish. The crucible would test every recruit, but it would test her more thoroughly than most. Outside the barracks, Camp Pendleton settled into the quiet routine of a military installation, preparing for another day of transforming civilians into Marines. In a few hours, Echo Company would begin the most challenging phase of their training, designed to reveal character under extreme stress and determine who possessed the qualities necessary for military service. Sophia closed her eyes with the calm confidence of someone who'd prepared for this moment her entire life, not just during 11 weeks of Marine Corps training. Everything her father had taught her, every lesson about finding strength in unexpected places, every principle about adapting and overcoming regardless of circumstances, would be tested during the next 54 hours. She was ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.